Hi there, this is Billy Tarasio with the Modern Divorce Podcast, back with Darren Colburn. How you doing today, Darren?
I'm doing great, Billy. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so today we're tackling Brangelina. And we talking about Brangelina, but then something happened very recently that we should talk about. And then we went back and we researched it. And there is so much to talk about in terms of Darren and I's perspective legally on issues that we've seen publicly. The Brangelina divorce is so interesting because people feel, more strongly if that's a word, stronger about Brangelina than they do about almost any other celebrity couple. It was so funny. One of the articles I read, was about the reactions on the date the news was announced. Did you read that one?
Yeah, it was. Well, and you remember, there's this whole. I guess is a good point to talk about the backstory because they were married in 2016, but were together for about what 11? Yeah, about 11 years prior to that. So um, they met on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Well, I'm sure they knew each other prior to that. Hold on, I'm sorry, Billy. Can you pause it 1 second?
All right, Darren had to go let his dad in. We're good to go now.
Yeah. All right. So they met on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They probably knew each other beforehand, but that's really when their love story started, came together, really began. Famously, at the time, Brad was dating Jennifer, right?
Married.
Married. Yeah, they were married for 5 years. How did I just forget that? See, that's the thing is like the collective consciousness really just kind of forgets things. And that was a huge, Jennifer Aniston is still a superstar, but at the time she was basically as high up in the stratosphere as you can be because Friends was more recent. And
She's America's sweetheart.
yeah,
She's
and
the girl next door. She's so likable. And Angelina is so controversial from day one. I mean, she is the polar opposite of Jennifer Aniston.
yep. And if you've ever watched Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they had some serious chemistry on
I don't think I've
that.
seen it. I
Oh
need
yeah, you should
to.
watch it. They had some serious chemistry on that set. So which is a random discussion we can have another time about how do you like, uh, as an actor, like, you're doing these scenes with somebody else, everyone's attractive. How do you like stay in line?
You know, that's
You
not
know,
where I thought you would go with this. I thought we were going
yeah,
to talk about how sometimes in marriages people end up in steamy chemistry situations and they just can't help themselves, sort of like Jeff Bezos or many of the clients that walk in. And we got to see that on screen with Brad and Angelina.
yeah, yeah, and it was good. We need to go back and rewatch Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Um, but anyway, the news came out, so the rumors kind of developed. They were caught vacationing together, I think, in Kenya. There was a photo that was leaked. So they basically did an article, took ownership of it. At that time, Jennifer Aniston was kind of the mob was coming after them because they were kind of the villains then. But slowly over time, things evolve where it becomes clear that this isn't a fling type thing. They really have a long-term relationship, and then Brangelina is born. Right, the
Well,
name itself is fantastic, by the
yeah.
way.
And you start adopting babies and you're
Yeah,
doing good all over the world and you're these principled people. You're not going to get married until everybody can get married. Like they became
yeah,
iconic and in a very different way than Brad and Jen. Brad and Jen were like, prom queen and prom king.
right.
And um, Brad and Ange are like power couple, like a
Yeah.
force.
Well, and you can even see that in the naming, right? Like the kids are not solely last name Pitt; it's Jolie Pitt, right? And that I think is very reflective of probably who Angelina Jolie is as a person. She's a very strong, independent woman, But
Right. She's fierce. She's got opinions. She's got agendas. She feels things very, very strongly. And now let's bring it back to this divorce. So, what happened this week was we got news that she filed to test a request to testify about Brad being abusive or a bad father. And she requested that two of her children be interviewed on that topic as well. Now, why are we talking about the custody of Brad and Angelina's children years after she filed for divorce?
Some of it is a mystery. I think there was an incident that occurred that I think everyone agrees now in hindsight that we've all pieced it together, that occurred on an airplane in December or in 2016, a couple months prior to when Angelina filed, where I think everyone was coming back from France or something like that, and Brad Pitt was a couple sheets to the wind in terms of drinking. He got into a verbal altercation with Angelina on the plane. Their older son Maddox, who is one of the first children. So actually, I think it's just worth noting as a little footnote here. Maddox was originally adopted by Angelina as well as one other child, and then Brad later on adopted Maddox as his son. So the stripe there kind of makes a little more sense to me because that must have been a jarring ride as a child. But in any event, he's the oldest, right? He, apparently, I don't think there's any dispute that the verbal altercation happened, and that Brad Pitt was drunk, and that Maddox stepped in to defend his mom. Apparently, Brad Pitt lunged at him, and the only information I can find, which is really weird, and I looked at a bunch of different places, uh, and Brad Pitt allegedly made some form of physical contact with Maddox, which I have no idea what that means.
A lot of things, right? It could mean a
Did you
lot of
find
things.
any details?
No, I found no details.
Yeah.
Um, so let's just take one more step back here because it is really confusing. There's a lot to discuss. Angelina filed for divorce in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It is now 2021. We
Yes.
have been reading about different interactions and different interviews that both Brad and Jen have given, and it's clear that they're both seeing their kids, and yet we still have custody to deal with, and a judge has already declared them legally single. So the first thing I want to explain is that they have what's called a bifurcated divorce. Now, a bifurcated divorce means some issues have been dealt with and are done and are legally final, and other issues are not. Now, this comes up sometimes in our cases when things are taking a really, really long time or things are super complicated and you don't want to wait. Let's say you're working through your property issues like they are, and you want to get remarried or you just don't want to be married anymore. And even though it might be taking a long time, you can ask for a bifurcated divorce and deal with some issues one way and some issues another way. The other thing you could do is bifurcate it simply by issue, not necessarily time frame. You could say, hey, in this trial, we're only going to hear the child custody issues. And then in this trial, we're only going to do the support issues or the property issues. Now, personally, I think it's a great idea in family court because judges become overwhelmed and these cases are complicated and there's so many issues and positions, and being able to isolate them and really target them is often, I think, an advantage.
Yeah, I agree. And, this is another instance. I think we've talked about this a couple of times, but, the fact that their case has been pending for almost 4 years now um, is indicative of it doesn't matter how much money you have, how much influence you have. Sometimes, for lack of a better word, shit gets dragged out. Um, and, it's difficult to say who's the cause of that. Personally, I think it's probably Angelina because Brad's been pretty consistent. I mean, all of what gets leaked to the news. First of all, we should say there are leaks, right? Their case is quite clearly sealed because you can't pull all of the documents, but you can find some of them on the internet. And the assumption would be that one or both of them at different times are leaking some documents to their celebrities, to the media outlets they publish it, or someone in their camp is for whatever strategic reason. But all of the leaked documents have to do with custody. That's clearly like a primary dispute that's driving the continued litigation, right? Do you agree?
Absolutely. The only other leak I could find is unpaid child support claims by Angelina, which we can
Right.
talk about.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that. But Brad, since the very beginning, has been very vocal. I want joint custody, legal decision making and parenting time. I want 50-50. I want to be an equal parent. Um, and Angelina, the fact that we don't have an agreement and they're still, the assumption is that she wants something different, right?
Oh, quite obviously.
Yeah.
She said many, many times from day one, I left because of the health and safety of my family. And this is something that she keeps repeating over and over and over again. Now, one thing that is usually true and is worth noting when you're watching your friends go through divorce and when you're getting divorced, the person who is doing the shit talking is usually the person who's wrong.
Yeah.
It's true. And when you have somebody out there who's talking about how bad this other person is in order to justify their position, like you're not going to win in court, so you're going to try to win in the public opinion's eyes. Like it's just bad news.
On that point, there was something I read in an interview of her that I thought was interesting because she was saying to some magazine, right, which is going to be published all across the world, read by millions of people, that she was always worried about her mother when she was growing up,
Mhm.
and she doesn't want her kids to be worried about her. So she thinks it's better to cry in the shower rather than see her kids cry. And I just couldn't help but thinking about the irony of that statement because you're blasting your thoughts to the entire world. Like you don't think your kids read the headlines about you guys? Like that's absurd. So I just thought it was and I mean she's a human. I don't know her, we'll give her the benefit of the doubt, yada yada yada. But like I just think it came off as a little disingenuous to me, right?
Right, right. Like, why are you even saying that? Are we
Right.
supposed to feel sorry for you? Because nobody
Yeah.
really does.
That's a good, and this is a great point to jump onto child support because this might be a
Oh,
hot take. I mean, I found no details. I know basically what you cited. I couldn't find any other details that she came out and bashed Brad for not paying enough child support or not paying what he was ordered to pay. Brad's attorney came out and said, "Look, we've paid $9 million over the last 2 years." Um, Other than that, we don't know any details. So it's hard to say whether or not, like from California's laws standpoint, it's the right number or not. But there's clearly some kind of order, and if Brad was in fact not paying, I feel like we would hear a lot more um, about that, other than just her, whining about it. Otherwise, and just to be honest, from a layperson's perspective, that has never had $9 million and may never will. I mean, fingers crossed. Um, Podcast army, come on, let's get those views up. But it comes off as kind of tone deaf because I'm not saying Brad's the higher earner. I'm not saying she's not entitled to support, but like there are mothers out there that can't afford to like provide food, clothing, shelter, so to hear that from her, like I'm not getting enough support, really kind of fits the description of the caricature that you were talking about, was the person who's complaining,
well,
right?
maybe she feels like she's Maleficent in real life, the evil, misunderstood queen with the heart of gold.
I haven't seen it,
Oh, it's
but I'll
great.
take your
You
word for
should.
it.
You should. It's
Yeah,
great. I
yeah,
mean, both of them have unlimited earning potential, just
yeah,
unlimited.
yeah,
So the concept of child support is a little strange. It was interesting that that got leaked. One of the things I want to mention is that it is very likely, well, it's almost certain that they have an arbitrator. Now they've never
yeah,
come out to say that, but what does that mean? We've talked about that before. That means you have elected a private judge. Usually you do that because things go faster. It's really weird that you would have an arbitrator and have things drag out this long because the judge works for the parties.
yeah. And gets paid by the parties. And apparently, Angelina. So we have no idea if the judge was agreed to. I would assume that the judge was not agreed to
The
because
judge
Angel.
the judge is the same man who married them.
Got it. Um,
So
so
they chose this judge.
right, but I read that Angelina was trying to get this person removed,
Yes.
not because of the marriage stuff, but because of some alleged relationship between Brad's attorney and Angelina's attorney. Uh, Obviously, that wasn't successful, but it's another thing that caused delay.
Mhm,
Um, and I just find it to be interesting because, like you said, they must have agreed to this person at some point.
mhm.
And what probably happened is she got some indication that maybe he's not buying what she's selling. And so what do? Try to find a new decision maker, because that's what the judge is. They make decisions when you can't come to an agreement.
And I
Right?
imagine that, the arbitration rules are private, and I imagine figuring out how to get an arbitrator removed took some real creative lawyering, because it's not like you get to appeal to this person's boss. If we need to get a judge removed for cause, we can ask the presiding judge, but there's no presiding arbitrator.
Yeah. Or it could have just been shitty lawyering that she paid for because it wasn't successful.
You're
you know?
right, it was not
But
successful. And
maybe it was successful insofar as it caused delay. I mean, I'm not aware. I can tell you from what I mean. We know that Brad doesn't have 50% custody, so to some degree, during the pendency of this action, Angelina is getting what she wants. And in those cases, I mean, you see it in our world too. Sometimes when you're getting what you want, do you care if the case gets pushed out another year if you already have what's most important to you?
yeah.
Not necessarily, right?
You're absolutely right. So we have not talked yet about the child abuse. We talked about the alleged incident that occurred. We talked about how Brad was drinking. Um, we have not touched on how the FBI, how the police, and how their version, California's version of the Department of Human Services or Protective
Child safety,
Services.
yeah,
Mhm.
child services.
Investigated Brad. Why would all three of those organizations be involved? And why, if the incident happened in the air, are we talking about it in California?
You know, the I imagine the FBI is involved because of the airplane, um, and they're also, we don't. The problem is we don't know enough details. But given the fact that everyone is involved, there could be different allegations at different times. So maybe the argument started in the air, maybe, and then landed, and then maybe there were other allegations about what happened later. What we know definitively is that every organization that has looked into it has cleared Brad of any wrongdoing. So I don't know what your thoughts are on the jurisdictional issues, but that was kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes people think if the FBI is involved, it's because it's more serious. And
Yeah,
it's worth mentioning that the FBI, which is the Federal Bureau of
right,
Investigation, has jurisdiction over federal crimes. Now,
right,
child abuse is not a federal crime unless you're, let's say, transporting a child over state lines,
right,
and then it becomes federal. Or if that's really the only way you could do it, or if it occurred on an airplane and the airplane is governed by all federal aviation laws, and
right,
now that's why the FBI has jurisdiction. So it's not that the abuse allegations were so crazy or so important, or Brad and Angelina got special investigation because of their status. It simply is an issue of what is the crime and where does it occur and who has jurisdiction. So the FBI did investigate even after the Department of Child Services was done and the police department was done. The FBI continued and came to the same conclusion. Another really interesting thing is the police department in California, I'm not sure which one, I think it's the LAPD, came out and made a statement saying they were not investigating Brad, which I thought was so funny, because when do you ever hear of a police department coming out saying
yeah. I
they're
mean
not investigating something?
that, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because one hand it's like it kind of makes sense that they would do that because he is a public figure, everyone's talking about it, but at the same time nobody else gets that type of special treatment. So then you wonder about bias. But the bias argument, I think, is a little difficult to sell because you've got three different organizations. And again, you've got state organizations and federal organizations. So the idea that all of them would collude together in lockstep on behalf of a star. And by the way, um, Angelina is just as much of a star. They're both superstars. So like throw that in the mix as well. It's not like it's Jeff Bezos and I mean Mackenzie's now kind of more famous, but she's not on the same stratosphere in terms of people talking about her, right? They're both superstars in this case. The other thing that I think is worth noting is that as you mentioned, about the FBI and what their goals are is to investigate and prosecute federal crimes. Well, not necessarily prosecute, but investigate federal crimes. The Department of Child Safety has a completely different goal. They're designed to protect the children. The children are living in California, so they have different goals, but it ultimately reached the same conclusion. One thing that is interesting is, with the recent news that Angelina wants the children to testify about alleged domestic violence, it's unclear whether or not this is a new allegations or just a rehashing of the same allegations, right, from 2016, which I think would be not good for her. Because they've not gone anywhere.
Right. I mean, my impression is that Angelina seems to be saying, look, Brad was an alcoholic and he was mean a lot. That's
Yeah.
that's what I'm gathering from what she's saying. I don't think he was physically abusive. I don't think she's saying he was physically abusive, but I think that their relationship was breaking down. And
Yeah.
when a relationship breaks down and somebody is an admitted alcoholic, they're not going to be behaving at their best. And he may have had a few years where he was kind of a jerk to live around. That's probably what she's saying. And now the kids are going to come say, dad was a jerk too. And the thing that Miss Angelina doesn't understand is just how detrimental that is to kids. Kids can deal with their dad being a jerk for a couple of years or their mom being a jerk
Yeah.
for a couple of years. It's when you get it drilled into your head that there's something wrong with the other parent that children have a problem.
Right. And there is, did you want to talk about Brad's mom's birthday party?
Absolutely.
Like a good segue for that.
Yeah.
By the
So
way, have you ever ridden a Segway? Because they're fantastic.
I love them. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
I've only
Anyway.
done it once, but we
Yeah.
should do it as a company. It's a good time.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so one of the things that I read that really put me over the top was that Brad's mom, I think she goes by Gran or Granny. Brad's parents seem so normal. Where are they from? They're like in Minnesota or something.
Yeah. Um,
This house with a big yard, like they're normal
yeah.
people. They're
Yeah.
not Angelina's parents. They're not Brad. They're not Angelina. They're like your grandparents or my grandparents.
Yeah.
Um, and the kids were absent from Gran's 80th birthday. And as I read on, it was clear that the kids used to spend time with their grandparents. They used to have a healthy relationship with their grandparents, and now they want nothing to do with their grandparents. And to me, that is a clear sign of alienation. When children reject an entire side of a family, that's not related to any claims that the grandparents are abusive. It's just that they're an extension of their father who they're being told to reject. Ugh,
Right.
alienation all the way.
Right. And the other thing that's interesting to consider, and again, we don't know, I feel like if the situation were clear cut, we'd have a decision by now, right? If so, there's basically, think of it in like two extremes, right? Um, if Brad were such a drunk and a danger to the children, there would probably be so much evidence of that Angelina could already have a decision, right? Um, so, like, I kind of tend to agree with you. Obviously, this is all speculative, but I tend to agree with you that there's probably some alienation going on.
Well, we know without a doubt that Angelina is a mama bear.
Hmm.
We know that. We know that she homeschools the kids, that she doesn't like the idea of them going to school, that she had some pretty, I guess, radical or progressive views on parenting. that involved keeping her children very close to her, very, very bonded, and their dad also, and also very like hands off, very encouraging them to be who they are, to speak their minds. I read that Brad really wanted some structure and some like rules and respect, and she's
Well,
like,
he wanted them to go to traditional school. I think that was one of the battles that they had.
right, right. And so I think if Brad were truly abusive in that home, she would have kicked him out a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true, and it does kind of make sense if there was a single incident, not his best day, that she would maybe have an overreaction to that, and or at least in hindsight. The question is, I guess we'll talk about, let's say Brad was a complete asshole on that plane, and there's no dispute about it.
Yeah.
Um, Questions are, is he what is he doing to address his drinking? What is he doing to try to pursue the relationship with the children? If he wasn't interested, the case wouldn't be going on, right? Like, so that to me, he is, people always, I think people forget, like, because I hear all the time, well, so and so doesn't really care about the children. Okay, then why are we fighting? Like, why are we fighting? Like, nobody likes going to trial. Nobody does. Sometimes it can be child support issues, meaning that um, people want more custody of their children, so they pay less in support. But I doubt that's a motivator for Brad Pitt. So it's very clear that he desperately wants to be involved in these kids' life. The question is, can his actions, can he address the drinking and potential anger issues? And I doubt that he's not getting good legal advice about proactively addressing those issues.
Well,
So
we do know he went to AA. He talked about it. He
yeah,
talked about what
yeah,
happened in AA. He talked about how freeing that was. Like, so the only thing that I think might be hurting Brad, and this is pure speculation, is that many of the things that have gotten us to this point have been his agreeing. And I
right,
wonder if he and his lawyers, I looked up his lawyer, by the way. You should too.
yeah.
Tom,
I haven't looked him up.
you should look
What?
him up. You should look him up. Look at the website. I
Okay.
don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. It's a great call, but I think they're agreeing to things. I think he's agreeing to things, and I think the sometimes you're better off simply taking it to court and presenting your case. Now, no doubt, if he was in Arizona, he would have been better off simply taking it to the case. But I think also in California, had he not agreed to supervised visits, to all of the agreements he's made, had he just gone to court and said, look, it wasn't my best day, I'm better, he may be in a very different position.
Right. And maybe they agreed to a process that uh, he didn't know would expose him to an extended delay. Right. I'm trying to find this attorney. Is it
I
is
think
it
it's Tom
Jackson?
Squiggle, but I don't know. I
Okay.
found it somewhere. Maybe we'll put his
You know, it is worth noting though that A- Angelina has had numerous attorneys. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she has had, I think I read like maybe four up into this point,
Wow.
uh, which is um, which is another can. I mean, listen. Sometimes we deal with lots of people that aren't happy with their first representation. We always ask those people what happened, and because there can be legitimate issues, right? And so that's not uncommon. But like if you're on like number four, that's usually a red flag to um, for an unreasonable client. I mean, you don't like what you're being told behind closed doors, right?
Well, and the other difference between Angelina and somebody else is, like, let's be clear. There's a lot of bad attorneys out there. That's just the way it is. Some people dabble in family law. Some people just don't have a good personality. Some people are too expensive. There's a lot of reasons that people change attorneys that aren't relevant here.
Yeah,
They're only hiring the best. They're only hiring top tier lawyers, people who know what they're doing. So if you're firing three attorneys who are top tier, who know what they're doing, it's because you don't like what you're being told. And maybe that's allowing you to delay.
right. Well, I had to get new counsel. blah blah blah. It is really interesting. I wonder if we'll know what the outcome was at the end of all this. You know,
Yeah, one day we'll know. It's interesting. The kids are getting older, they're aging out. It's we don't know exactly how often Brad is seeing his kids. We don't know everything that they're fighting over, but I bet that we will know when it finally gets wrapped up. I the only other topic I want to kind of clearly address is alcoholism and child abuse in your case. There are many, many times when people come to us and this situation plays out. It's not Brad, it's not Angelina, but it's a couple that have been under a lot of stress from whatever disagreements there are, and they're coming to a head in their divorce. And it is not unusual at all during that time for somebody to either be abusing alcohol or drugs. And it is not unusual under those circumstances for there to be an incident that is less than your best moment. So these are people like Brad. They're not abusive, by nature. They're not tyrants. They hit a breaking point, they make a bad decision. And the way that you handle that aftermath is just crucial. Now, you said a couple of things that were really important. What steps are you taking to deal with your alcoholism? That's really important.
hmm
Are you owning up to what happened, to your mistake? Now, here you have to be careful because, of course, you don't want to admit anything that could be criminal.
right.
And at the same time, you want to say exactly that. It wasn't my best moment. I wish it hadn't happened. I apologize. Let's move on. Because anybody who is a parent has had those moments where you're like, oh, I should have done a better job.
Yeah. I think I think he's admitted to that. You know, there are things that I could have done to be a better father. I haven't really heard any of that type of perspective on the other end. You
No,
know, and
no.
one thing that is that you hear a lot of it. Brad through all this has not attacked her at all, which I think is pretty incredible because it, it would seem like a pretty natural thing to want to do, um, and especially with some of the inflammatory stuff. And again, I mean, this is all speculative. Who knows? But it's an I kind of feel bad for the kids too. Maddox is. I watched a bunch of videos. He's over and doing college in South Korea, and it's very much this paparazzi thing that we talked about with um, Britney Spears, where he's even all the way across the world, and people just come up to him on campus and ask him, "Hey, how's your relationship with your dad? So is it over?" I mean, what a terrible thing, regardless of the truth of the matter and if there's alienation or what. I mean, just it's a crappy thing for all of this to be happening so publicly. You
It
know,
really is. And if you find yourself in this situation, like it's worth looking at your own relationship and your own divorce and thinking like, do I have this power dynamic? Is
right?
there one of us that is super controlling, really driving the show, adamant that things be their way or the highway? And am I the one who's more prone to compromise? Am I the Brad in the situation? If you are the Brad in the situation, you cannot approach your legal battle the same way you've approached your marriage. You cannot.
Right.
You cannot.
Right.
You have to have a different strategy, and so you need to listen to your lawyer and talk to your lawyer. And if you are, the Angelina, the worst thing that the Brads can do is make reasonable concessions early on that they can't come back from. Sometimes you're better off just drawing that line in the sand. And it's very hard to change the power dynamic. And if you're the Angelina in the situation, here's what usually happens when you're not Angelina and you're that person in the situation. You have 6 lawyers, you spend all of your money, you end up losing, and you're broke.
Yeah, I don't think she'd have to spend quite a bit of money to be
I'm not
broke.
talking about actually.
Yeah, I know, I know. I'm just making a joke here, you know. But she feels very, very strongly, which is difficult, you know. I mean, I'm sure we've all had clients like that, especially because when you truly, people have different tolerances for different things. They have different perspectives, and when you think that something is truly bad for your kids, um, and the alienation thing can be weird because when you're empowering your kids to think for themselves and to make their own decisions, but then you're kind of unknowingly influencing them not to want to have a relationship with their dad, it's kind of like a self-feeding cycle, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
now you're doing what the kids are giving you, telling you to do, basically, but not realizing that you're driving them in that direction. And then the more you go in that direction, the more they feel a certain way. So you get validation. Um, it,
I'm glad you're saying that because if you that is also something to check yourself. When you say to yourself, "I'm just leaving it up to the kids. It's not me, it's them."
right,
That's not good enough. If you
right,
are that person, and there's so many of our clients or so many people that we've met over the years that say that that is not your job. Your job as a parent is to influence your kids. Res-
right,
Respect them, don't put them in any dangerous situation. Don't tell them they can't have their truth. But you know what else the truth is? The truth is that everybody is better off with a good relationship with their parents. And if
right.
there's a way to get there, you should get there. So that's what you need to be saying, not I'll just leave it up to them.
Right. Well, the analysis doesn't stop there. You have to look at why do the children want what they want, right?
Mhm.
And maybe it's a legitimate thing where, there's serious substance abuse concerns or neglect concerns or abuse, and it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We'll go with it. But maybe they just like being with one parent more because they don't have any rules over that parent's house and they get to be on the computer all day or whatever it is. Like, um, you know,
Yeah.
so.
And trust your attorney because if you're Angelina, your friends might be telling you everything you want to hear, but
Yeah.
like if you've got a good attorney, trust them. They live in this world and we get to see families play out years and years down the road in different ways and we get to see there is a right way to do this.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in those like conversations with her friends because I'm wondering what version of, well, such and such went through a divorce and they got such and such would, I hear that all the time, right? I'm wondering what what version of that happens in the upper echelons of the celebrity stratosphere. you know,
Yeah.
like uh, it's got to be a for high-powered celebrity divorce, it's got to be a very small world, small pool of attorneys. I think Brad's attorney, I was just looking as you told me about him. Apparently, he represented Charlie Sheen, a couple of other high-profile people. So he's like in the business of celebrity divorce, which
Yeah. Yeah. But he's old school. He's old school back from a time when, dads made concessions that maybe they shouldn't. So
yeah.
I've got an opinion on this, obviously.
Well, it could also come from Brad too,
Right.
because Brad, to some degree, beats his own drum. And this kind of ties back into what you said something at the beginning. Back in 2006, Brad said, "We're not getting married until everyone in this country who wants to get married can get married." So he is obviously a principled person to some degree, and maybe he just doesn't want to fight. Um,
Yeah.
um, that's kind of the picture I have of Brad in my head.
He seems like a
Yeah,
pacifist. He's just
yeah.
so
But
like,
then he may hold it in and not feel the feelings and drink the feelings away, and then when the feelings come out, it's not good,
there
right?
might be physical contact.
Yeah, you gotta have healthy ways of releasing the pressure.
Well, Darren, we will follow Brangelina like the rest of the world. And if we have more to report, we will come back and do a supplemental podcast episode.
Let's do a round two when we find where the chips fall, and we can talk about how wrong we were or right we were.
I love
Either
it.
way, it'll be fun. All right,
Bye,
thanks,
Darren.
Claire.